sit down and everybody's like ready to go. Do we have Representative Theringer virtually?
I am on a screen here. I don't know if I'm with your group.
Oh, we can hear you. Oh, there you go. All right, thank
Your head
you.
is giant, Steve.
I'm looking over your shoulders.
Like
you
5 feet tall.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well we'll give it. We'll start right now. It's 11:15. Hello, welcome everyone. Really glad that you can be here. This is always a really popular session, and obviously there's a lot of you here today, so it's a popular session again. I am Rachael Myers. I'm the executive director of the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance. The Housing Alliance, many of you know, organizes to pass public policy at the state level to try to make housing affordable for everybody, to end homelessness, to make sure that everyone can live in a safe, healthy, affordable home. And many of you are part of that. You know that we put together a public policy agenda every year that we develop after listening to folks in communities all across the state, primarily, and first listening to people who are directly impacted by the housing crisis, the folks who need affordable housing and who are facing homelessness or experiencing homelessness. And then we work together with many of you to lobby that and to talk to our lawmakers here and convince them to pass this agenda and work with them on supporting that. And so we've got a really, really great panel. We are a little context, you probably all know this legislative session between now and the 2025 legislative session, we have a really big thing happening. Can anybody say what that thing is? Elections. So that is going to have a big impact on the 2025 legislative session. In some ways, we don't know exactly what the impact is going to be because there are many things that are like to be determined after the election. We're going to have a whole bunch of new lawmakers. We're going to have new leadership in the Senate. We're going to have a new governor. I assume that Rep. Ormsby, you may talk a little bit about the initiatives that we're facing and the impact that those might have on the budget, which is already a little bit challenging in the coming year. So there's a lot happening between now and the 2025 session that's going to shape how effective we can be. This is all happening also in the context of a continuing and worsening affordable housing and homelessness crisis, right? You heard, I think most of you heard, Mike Fong this morning say the number that people need to earn in Washington State to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, and that's $40 an hour, and that's working 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. Most people don't earn $40 an hour. We have the 5th highest housing wage in the country, so the housing wage is what you need to earn to afford that 2-bedroom apartment. So we have a growing housing crisis and a growing affordability crisis, which is it's the number one driver of the growing homelessness crisis. 31,000 people were counted experiencing homelessness on just one night during that point in time count in January. About 16,000 of those people more than 16,000 of those people were living unsheltered. So this is all happening. The crisis is continuing. We don't quite know what the legislature is going to look like and what the leadership's going to look like. So we have a lot of work to do between now and the 2025 session, and then for many, many years after that. You also heard that we need 1.1 million homes built in Washington, and we're not on pace with that. The majority of those homes need to be affordable to the lower income folks in our communities. So we have a lot of work to do, and I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad that we are joined by our panelists to talk about what they're going to try to do in the 2025 legislative session. So I will briefly introduce our panelists, and I will note that we are missing a couple of people. Senator Patty Kuderer was going to join us, and she is ill, so she won't be here. Representative Mia Gregerson had another commitment that cropped up that she couldn't avoid, and so she will hopefully be joining us a little bit late. If not, we've got 3 fantastic lawmakers here who can give us the inside scoop about what to expect in the 2025 session. So I will start with introducing Representative Steve Theringer, who is on your screen. Representative Theringer is the chair of the House Capital Budget Committee, and that's the committee where capital funds, including the Housing Trust Fund, is lived and appropriated. So Representative Theringer has a lot to say and a lot to do with how much we get in the Housing Trust Fund every year, with what resources are available for you all to develop affordable homes everywhere in the state. To my farthest left, we have Representative Tim Ormsby from the 3rd Legislative District right here in Spokane. And Representative Ormsby is the chair of the House Appropriations Committee in charge of the budget, the House main budget writer. So he's going to start off and give us an overview of what to expect in the budget in 2025. And then closest to me, we have Representative Strom Peterson from the 21st Legislative District, who is the chair of the House Housing Committee. Also, obviously, has a lot to say about what moves through the House on housing policy. So we are really joined by exactly the right people to be talking with us about what to expect in 2025 around housing and homelessness issues. So with that, I am going to initially turn it over to Representative Ormsby and then to Representative Theringer to talk about the budget. So Rep. Ormsby, can you start with some budget context? Can you give us an overview of the budget forecast for the upcoming biennium and what that's likely to mean for anybody asking the legislature to include new investments?
Yes. Is this coming through okay? Good. Thanks, Rachel, and welcome to the 3rd Legislative District. You might not know it by the surroundings, but this is one of the lowest income zip codes in the state. So we definitely are challenged with affordable housing, getting people in a safe and secure setting. Big picture, just as background and context, we end up having to account for 4 years of spending when we get into this cycle. So not just the upcoming biennium, which begins on July 1st for 2 years, but then the subsequent biennium as well, so that the spending and revenue reconcile over 4 years. And it's a burden to have to do. That's been going on for about 10, 12 years now that we've had to reconcile the budget over 4 years. So let's take an initial objective look at the upcoming 4 years beginning on July 1. At the end of that 4 years, if we just do what we're doing now, don't add any new programs or spending, just what we're doing now, don't make up for shortfalls in funding expectations, we will be $3 billion in the red at the end of 25-27, that biennium that begins July 1st, 2027. If we add in things that I consider to be maintenance of government spending, which would be all the collective bargaining contracts for state employees, adult family homes, child care workers, home care workers, et cetera, and then we appropriately fund our public employees and school employees' health care, that's another $4 billion on top of the 3. So we're looking at about a $7 billion shortfall over the 4 years. And again, that's not adding any new programs. That's not increasing eligibility. That is a bare bones. It is what we call maintenance level. And that is a very high level look. I have a lot of anxiety about this. You know, the rule number 1, don't panic. Just got to get to work and, you know, get to work, show up, lace up our boots, get with the program, and put in a good day's work. And we're going to lead with our values, as we always have. And the reason for this shortfall is like, did you guys fall asleep at the wheel here? How did all of a sudden you come up with this shortfall? Well, for the first time in 4 years, we had the economic and revenue forecast. Happens 4 times a year. It's going to happen tomorrow, so I can't really give you a forecast of the forecast just yet. But June was the first time in 4 years that we had lower revenue expectations than the previous forecast. So you do a forecast, then you compare the next one to the previous one, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to be getting one tomorrow. There'll be one in the middle of November, and the governor will be required to write a budget to that revenue expectation. And I'm really hoping that things turn around, but there is just not the kind of economic activity that we've experienced in the past. And the spending for great programs that we're proud to have introduced just to maintain what we're doing in those areas, let alone something as devastating as the document recording fee shortfall that is about $400 million. So, without putting our thumb on the scale about what our priorities are, and I think you've seen, particularly from the House Democratic Caucus, about how high value our housing stock and housing affordability and housing trust fund and all of the programs and services in the housing space. So we've been committed to that. We're not going to abandon our commitment, but our challenge is going to be coming up with enough revenue to fill the gap. And I'm for revenue. I am for funding state government at an appropriate level, but I do want to go and give you, I don't want to glaze over the seriousness of this. It's going to take a lot of work, and there's going to be a lot of pressure in the legislature on the revenue front in order to make sure that we balance the books. And I wish it was better news at this point. This cycle feels a little bit different, and we're just not getting revenue into the system in the way that we've been and that we had hoped for.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Sorry to start things off that way, but I thought it was important because that's where we're at. I want to put a little bit of a pin in the document because you noted the document recording fee revenue shortfall of $400 million. That is the fund source, the primary state fund source for homelessness services in every county in the state and for operations and for services and permanent supportive housing. Really, really critical fund source. And a gap of $400 million for basically a maintenance, pretty close to a maintenance level budget for that is a huge problem. Homelessness is something that we need to be doing more for. We cannot be pulling back and doing less for it. I'm going to ask my commerce friends, Kirsten, I don't know if Ted is here. Are we still at that $400 million? That's still the right number? Hi, Ted. Yeah. Thank you. If folks didn't hear that, it's related to the mortgage interest rate because it's related to real estate activity. So the drop in those rates may mean that more homes are sold, so we're collecting more money, so we may not have a $400 million gap, but we're still going to have a multi-$100 million gap. Thanks. Okay, well, I think maybe in somewhat better news, Representative Theringer, can you give us an overview of what we can expect for the capital budget, again, which is where the Housing Trust Fund and most other affordable housing investments are funded?
Well, good morning, Rachel. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for letting me zoom in here. It may seem a little bit big brother-like, but it makes it easier for me than having to travel to Spokane. Yes, the capital budget's a little bit different. We'll probably be at our historic levels, which is around 4.6 billion. That is thanks to, our friends that write the operating budget. As folks know, they pay for the bond debt that funds a lot of the housing programs that we put into the budget. And I guess I would say that, you've heard the phrase that all money's green. So and make sure you sort of alluded to this, the initiatives are an important piece to this budget and revenue picture. In our supplemental budget last year, we put out of a $1.3 billion budget, we had about $600 and $700 million in Climate Commitment Act dollars. And if those dollars go away, some of those programs will have to be backfilled with other bond funding, which would then diminish the amount of money that would go to housing. And that's the same for the capital gains money, which goes to school construction and then goes to early learning. Then what's left over comes into school construction. So, or no, it's the other. First 500 goes into school construction, and the remainder goes into early learning. So, again, if that initiative passes, that money is lost to our budget. Building our budget. So there are, as Rachel, you mentioned, there's a lot of variables out there that I think should be cleared up on, the November 5th or by Friday when all the votes are counted. So that will give us a clear picture, which I think will help budget writers for sure, and also maybe give a little more confidence to folks in the economy so that the revenue forecasts aren't as dire. But right now, and I don't know what you guys have been talking about with Commerce and other budget, with the folks about the housing budget, but we've been very robust, partly from federal money and partly from the state economy, being very robust, as Tim alluded to put almost $6 billion into housing over the last 3 biennium. And that's a major investment. And quite frankly, I think there's been some challenges getting all that money out the door and building the units that we want. But things like the CHIP program, the Community Housing Infrastructure Program, which we stood up, I think, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, has been a very popular program. And it's really, I think, led to opening up a lot of vacant land for housing, as folks may know. As a lot of the housing money goes to building the units, but not for building that infrastructure. So to get the land developed to put the units on. And so our hope is to make that pretty robust. I think Commerce has made a submittal to the governor to even create a new program called SHIP, which we'll take a look at. To be honest, I'm not sure we want to build a whole new program, but we might incorporate some of those things like streets into our CHIP program to help again with that infrastructure for housing. And a number of the categories that folks are familiar with, acquisition of property, to convert buildings into housing, the preservation of existing housing, looking at mobile home parks, which are, probably some of the most affordable housing around, and there's a lot of pressure on those. Hedge funds are coming in and buying them up and raising the rents, and that's a challenge. So, and I think home ownership is also, habitat and those types of programs, I think, are things that have been successful that we hope to be able to continue to fund in our capital budget for the biennium. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Representative Theringer. Also note that we have been joined by Representative Mia Gregerson. Welcome. Thanks for being here with us. Representative Gregerson is vice chair of the House Appropriations Committee. And Rep. Gregerson, we just got done talking about the operating budget and the capital budget. We had the next question for you, but I'm going to give you a minute to get settled in, and we'll come back to that question after we ask Representative Peterson another question. So we're going to move on to some policy issues. If we can't solve everything with money, because we don't have quite enough money to solve it all, there's a lot we can do with policy. Representative Gregerson, the newest American Community Survey data shows that our average rent of $1,731, again, is the fifth highest in the country. Last year, you championed a bill, along with many of your colleagues, that would have capped rent increases at 7% annually. It would have exempted new construction, and it also exempted affordable housing operated by nonprofits and public housing authorities whose rents are restricted by other policies. And rents could be reset to any amount in between tenants. So the rent stabilization would have lasted. It would have capped rents for existing tenancies when people were living in their apartments. As the Housing Committee Chair, you heard testimony from dozens, maybe more than dozens, of tenants about the way rent increases were impacting them, a lot of really hard and really powerful stories. Can you tell us why you supported this bill and what stood out to you in listening to the tenant stories and the stories from landlords, both those who were in support of rent stabilization and those who were opposed to it? And then can you also share what you think are the prospects for passing this in 2025?
Great, thank you, and thanks everybody for hanging in till the very end and joining us here. And I just also want to give great appreciation to our budget writers. They're in the right place on these issues, and they will do whatever they can to make sure that we can, as Tim said, lead with our values. So rent stabilization. This will be, to me, the number one priority coming out of the House Housing Committee. And I'm hoping it is going to be the number one priority coming out of the House Democratic Caucus. We haven't made those decisions yet, but certainly Speaker Jenkins in her opening statements last session talked about rent stabilization, and so I think we have the momentum, certainly in the House, to continue that, the success. We got it passed in a short session. It was hard policy. This was probably the most divisive policy we've worked on, and we worked on things like banning assault weapons. So this is a highly volatile policy between the House Democratic Caucus and the House Republicans, but we think that we think it makes sense on any number of reasons. Rachel kind of went through the parameters of it. One of the things I want to talk to you all about when you're talking to other people in kind of advocating for this policy, this is not rent control. This is not like old school San Francisco style rent control. This is a 7% rent increase, and really when you look at a $1,700 annual average rent, 7% still kind of sucks, right? I mean, 7% is a lot of money for a family who's struggling, but we think that is something that at least can kind of make sense with some of the other cost drivers that some of the landlords are facing. And the other key component is that when a tenancy changes, that landlord has the ability to readjust those to market rates. So oftentimes tenancies change fairly regularly, so a landlord is really able to keep up with costs over a number of years. So we think it's a smart policy, we think it's fair policy, and we think it's policy that really works hand in hand with a lot of the supply side work that we've done over the last couple of years. A couple of years back was the Year of Housing, as you may have seen, and it was a lot of things that were supported by housing advocates, as well as realtors, as well as developers, to really try to make the building of housing that much easier. We still have some things to do in that space. I think we'll get to a couple of those questions a little bit later, especially in the affordable housing area. But we've kind of set the bar to create more affordable housing, and we think rent stabilization is kind of the balance to that. And as far as the advocacy goes, and I'm still hearing stories. I also serve on the Snohomish County Council, and I was at a town hall a few months ago where probably about 200 people that lived in manufactured housing communities in my district, so it's a very urban district in southwest Snohomish County, are just absolutely terrified because they're saying corporations are coming in, buying up manufactured housing communities, raising the rents, and these are seniors on very fixed incomes, and they don't know what they're going to do. So this is happening in those communities, and as you all know, it's happening in multifamily and single-family housing across the state. So the stories matter. I do want to just kind of stress that. I was at a thing up in Skagit County a couple of weeks ago and really stressing that you sharing either your personal stories or people that you're working with to share their stories, it makes a difference to how we write policy. And kind of going back to Tim says, we lead by our values. Our values are set by our constituents and by the stories, especially of those constituents that are struggling the most. So when we see a family that's seeing a 10, 20, 30, 40% rent increase, we know that even in the best of circumstances, people can't afford that. And there's no other place to move. Because of that housing crisis and the housing shortage, you don't really have an option of, oh, well, I'll go to the apartments down the street. So there's a lot of work that we're doing in that space on some of these algorithms that are out there with rent increases, working closely with the Attorney General's office on issues around that. But again, rent stabilization, I think, is my number one priority, and I think it will be the number one or top priority of the House Democratic Caucus coming out of this session.
Yeah, thank you. I want to just note that Representative Ormsby and I were at an event together here in Spokane a couple weeks ago, and we heard there was a panel, and there was a woman, a senior, living on a fixed income who lived in a manufactured housing community. So she owned her home, but she rented the land that her home sat on, and she talked about how a $66 rent increase impacted her, and $66 doesn't, for many people in this room perhaps, doesn't sound like it would be that destabilizing. And she talked about for the first few months, she stopped taking her medication because she didn't have any way to get more money, so she had to cut something out. And when she could no longer stop taking, or when she had to go back on her medication, she turned off her heat. She lives outside of Spokane, and she woke up several times to her home being 42 degrees in the middle of the night. So it's stories like that that impact, that tell us that we need to do this work. It impacts our organization, and it sort of makes that a priority for us, and I think it impacts lawmakers as well to hear those stories. So if you're working with folks who have those kind of stories and they're comfortable sharing them, and they feel like they can share them in an empowering way, please consider supporting them and doing that. So we're going to talk about homelessness a little bit, Representative Gregerson. Homelessness is increasing in Washington. I said before, the one-night count, over 31,000 people were identified just on one night. Over 16,000 people were living unsheltered, and that's an increase of about 25% over 2 years. And again, that's just one night. That's not everybody experiencing homelessness. The biggest driver, of course, is the high cost of housing, so these things are very connected. And given even with increasing homelessness and the fact that we don't have all the solutions, this summer the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling that basically allows local governments the ability, it overturned some protections that we had in place in Washington and some other states, and now allows local governments to fine, arrest, or otherwise punish people living unsheltered, even if they don't offer any other alternatives for them to survive, to sleep in at night. We know that those kinds of fines and arrests don't help, and they can actually lengthen people's homelessness by involving them with the criminal justice system, which puts a mark on their record and makes it harder for them to access housing later. So I'm curious, Representative Gregerson, what do you see as the state's role in preventing these kinds of punitive approaches to homelessness and ensuring that communities respond with evidence-based best practices? I write really long questions.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of a very well-esteemed panel and on a big topic. Hello, Chair Theringer, there virtually. This is a very controversial topic. And I guess I just want to take a step back for a second because, government is just people, and local governments are all of us. They're our partners. We are partners. I can look at some of the elected officials. We've been from local government. Jeff Robinson, who received an award last night, I remember talking with him when I was the mayor of SeaTac, and I said to him, what should we do? And he said, let's make a housing department. I mean, that was 15 years ago. So this is something that we've been talking about for a really long time. And in South King County, where I come from, I remember wealthy people would come to SeaTac and Tuckwell and say, hey, can you show us what poor people look like? And I literally was like, I don't really know how to. Now it's because people could still live 20 people in an apartment, right? That was before visual poverty was a thing. But we knew that poverty was a thing, or that the ability to shelter in place or to get access to where you need to is getting harder and harder. We saw that a long time ago, and we still, this is a big problem, and so we're in this together. I think that when local governments are afraid to have that sting of having visual poverty in their communities, but also want to be seen as business-friendly or safe streets, safe places to gather, safe places to move around. I think that, right, that's the conversation. We can't be afraid to have that. But I think now is the time for those of us at the state to really have that mindful, thoughtful, inclusive, holistic policy. I think Representative Peterson will talk a little bit probably about a bill or some bills that he's working on that are all in partnership. I can say that I am working on, hopefully in partnership with many of you, just standards, right? Definitions of sheltering. Can local governments come up with interlocal agreements so that, we're not moving people from one place to the other where the services are more easily readily available, that look like, right, avoid in another community, right? We all need to be in this together. And I think that the comprehensive planning, we're talking about housing supply, that's a big deal. And so as the comprehensive plans are being developed and everyone's planning for that, this community, these communities, this issue is part of that conversation. I know that that's a difficult way to talk about it, and we all can, I know for myself, I can do better in talking about decriminalizing or criminalizing people who are forced to shelter in public spaces and what that means. And so part of all of this that we heard about stories is actually humanizing the policy. I know that my boss here, we're always talking about humanizing the budget. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, about those investments and trying to maintain those investments, work with you who are the experts in the community to maintain, do no harm. And I guess the last thing is that we are the stopgap for everyone who needs us, the most vulnerable people who have no voice. And so if we can't figure it out, who's going to? And so we can't be afraid to talk about something that's controversial, difficult as possible. And I don't think it's going to keep us from being able to develop more housing or having a thriving state. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Representative Peterson, do you want to say something? Do you want to talk about your bill that you'll be bringing back this year?
Sure, and I think one of the things that happens when I'm on some of these panels, especially with the three that are joining me, is the humility of the work that they do. These are three like incredible rock stars in this space, and we've got a whole mess of them. I wish Representative Alvarado was here too, but she was here for the conference for a while, but had to leave today. But just the sincere, great work that these people do in this space is fantastic. And part of that conversation, and I always use first names because, like, when we get in, and maybe I get a little more formal when we're in session, but part of the work that Mia was doing in South King County is really trying to deal with some of the issues of some of the shelters that were happening in her district, in the 33rd district. And so we were having conversations during session where cities were really trying to close down these emergency shelters that some of you all I know have been working with. So some deep-seated frustration kind of bubbled up inside of me and others, and we kind of authored a bill very, very late in session to try to come up with a way to really force cities to allow this type of housing. So on the heels of House Bill 1200, which we passed a few years ago, there really wasn't a forcing mechanism for the state. If a city just refused to allow certain types of step housing, there wasn't a whole lot we could do about it. The only kind of lever that could be used was through the governor's office. And in the history of the state of Washington, I don't think there's ever been a governor that has used that kind of lever in a local government. And it's kind of understandable. That's a pretty politically fraught. So we worked with our friends at the Department of Commerce to really try to come up with kind of a dispute resolution system, and they've already doing some great work in this space. So if a city has zoning issues that aren't allowing this kind of shelter, that some of you that are in this space, can kind of challenge the city and work with the Department of Commerce to come to hopefully an agreement for them to allow emergency housing or permanent supportive housing. And if not, then we will give Commerce kind of some financial levers to put some pressure on cities. Very controversial. Cities were not very happy with this bill. I've written a few bills that cities aren't very happy about, as has Representative Gregerson, but it's important. And so that bill didn't pass because it was kind of written very late in session, but we're still working on it. And the other thing that we've added to it is to include step housing as an essential public facility, to really make sure that cities have to allow this critical piece of the housing infrastructure for people that are on the verge or past the verge of disaster. So those are things that we're going to do. We want to come in pretty heavy with this, especially in the light of the grants pass decision. We know that we have to build this kind of housing, and we have to build it in all of our communities. I live in Southwest Washington, Southwest Snohomish County. Edmonds and Mukilteo are the two major cities that I represent, and that's kind of I think the epicenter of NIMBYism. So I'm more than happy to kind of make sure that my communities are doing that. We need to make sure that communities all across the state are doing that, and this is going to be one of the levers that we're going to use.
That's great, thank you. You can hold on to that mic because I'm going to give you Senator Cooter's question about insurance. And I will note that I saw a couple questions come in through the Q&A on the app. We're not going to do Q&A through the app because it's too confusing for me. If we have time for questions, I hope we'll have time. We'll have some people running mics here and here. But I did notice a question about insurance, and this is something that many of you are experiencing, across the country, it's not just here in Washington, affordable housing providers are facing some real significant financial challenges, and one of those is ballooning insurance premiums. The Office of the Insurance Commissioner is currently conducting a study and will present the findings to the legislature by the end of the year. So there's more that we are going to learn about that coming up. But I want to ask Representative Peterson, and then if anybody else has thoughts and you want to add to it, please do. What do you see as the most hopeful prospects for addressing this at the state level? Again, this is a national problem that people have called an existential crisis for affordable housing. What do you think the state can do with this?
Yeah, I think, and this study will help a couple of the things that we've kind of poked around looking at. Is there a way to work with all of you, with our nonprofit housing providers, to come up with some sort of almost a self-insurance, an insurance pool, kind of with the backing of state money. That's kind of one idea. It gets expensive pretty quickly, and so Tim was going to throw an elbow, I think, or Steve. But that's some of the thinking. Some of the other thinking, kind of as Rachel said, this is a national problem, and this is a problem not only in the affordable housing space, but just in homeowners insurance everywhere. Insurance companies have made some really, really bad bets. They're insuring things that shouldn't be insured. We'd see, floods and fires. We've got a hurricane that's about to blow through Florida again, and they're allowing homes to be rebuilt. So you are also paying for those kind of, I think, bad business decisions with the insurance industry as a whole, as anybody who's a homeowner is. So that's kind of on a big national level. I think on more of the local level, obviously Senator Cooterer isn't here today. Elections matter. She very well might be our next Office of Insurance Commissioner. This is an issue that she is very, very interested in digging into to see what can we do as a state when it comes to these insurance providers really jacking up rates. $500,000 deductibles, rates going up 300%. And then finally, as we were on a call, and probably a bunch of you were on a call not too long ago with some other housing providers talking about this. In the midst of that conversation, I sent an email to the AG's office because some of the other work that Representative Gregerson is working on with some of these shelters is violations of Fair Housing Act. And if insurance companies are arbitrarily saying, oh, you're housing poor people, therefore your insurance rates are going to be higher, that's very similar to what they used to do. It's like, oh, you're building housing in this neighborhood, therefore your insurance rates are going to be higher. So I'm really interested in looking at some of the Fair Housing Act implications on some of these insurance rates. And then we also have to look at, the kind of the continuum of care that maybe we're not providing, where some people are going into housing situations where they've been on the street for 6 or 7 years and suddenly they're in an apartment building and they're just not quite sure how to react. And so damage is being done. And some of those, that's the reality. And I'm working with some of my friends from Housing Hope up in Snohomish County. That is also reality. So we need to make sure that we're figuring out ways to reduce those kind of significant physical impacts to the housing that you're all doing, and that's through, more different levels of housing as well as the services that we need to provide for those people that are really suffering with, a mental health crisis. So lots of things, but definitely one of the top priorities that we're looking into, but it's complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated. Anyone else have anything you want to add to that? Representative Ormsby?
I'll just kick in with the editorial comment about insurance companies. It's nice to have a business that folks are mandated to purchase, right? That's always a good business to be in. It's a socialist business model, right? Risk pools have to be large enough to share the burden. And I don't want to have it be overly politicized, but so much of the damage that we're facing is climate-based, right? Wildfires that create their own weather systems, as Strom mentioned, the hurricane crashing into the Florida's west coast today. All of these things, we have to do something at the front end, and that's where these initiatives and the Climate Commitment Act and such, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and we're going to have to Washington State is going to have to make investments for our own health and safety, but also leading the way in bringing others along, that it is, while it's a challenge, it is a challenge that can be overcome, and we have to lead by example. And for the housing providers and the insurance issue, I totally get it. We have an office in a building dedicated to not-for-profits, and their insurance is going up like 250, 300%, and they're desperate for solutions, and one of them might be kind of this self-insurance model that Strom was talking about for housing. It's complex, and the solutions involve resources that we don't currently have. So our ability to function and do these things is all going to be a matter of what is the bank balance look like.
Thank you. I want to make sure that Representative Theringer, if you want to jump in, that you have an opportunity to do that. You don't have to.
Thanks, Rachel. It is a problem across the board. It's affecting our ability in schools to build schools. We're trying to build schools in a more economical way using mass timber. The insurance companies have concerns about that. And in our schools, their MSOC or maintenance and operation funding, a lot of that is being eaten up by insurance. And so I think it's a broad challenge. As Tim mentioned, climate is a big part of it. And that's another plug for voting no on this on 2117, because not only do we get that revenue, but it also starts to address that challenge of climate change. But I think there's other things we can do to look at the legal landscape that sort of leads to some of these higher insurance costs.
Yeah, thank you. You got a little soft there, so y'all heard the plug for voting no on 2117, just in case you missed that. Well, let's talk about another challenge that affordable housing providers are facing, which is a significant need for more funding for operations, maintenance, and services. Obviously, keeping rents affordable for low-income families and individuals doesn't leave a whole lot of margin for having enough money to do building repairs and even basic maintenance. And we've heard from many of you, many nonprofit and public housing providers, that you're seeing a higher proportion of people who need pretty significant services than you have in the past, and that all costs money as well. Especially given our budget challenges, what do you see as the short-term and the long-term solutions to meeting these financial needs? And I'm going to offer this question to anyone who wants to jump in. Representative Gregerson, you're pointing at Representative Ormsby. All right.
Okay, I'll give that a shot. So back we've done successive document recording fee bumps over the years. And the one in 2021 had a carve out for operation and maintenance, but with the shortfall of, in the hundreds of millions of dollars, even in a best case scenario, those resources aren't available, right, for the operation and maintenance. And I am hoping, as Ted mentioned, we start getting some robust real estate activity to replenish that shortfall. But it's still going to be a shortfall, and that is everywhere we look is a little frustrating and anxiety driving as far as the revenue sources that we have available that we can utilize to provide cushions for operation and maintenance. For example, as Steve and Strom talked about on the insurance side of things, that also kind of is whether it's a school district or depends on your geography and the whim of insurance companies and their bad choices and the consequences that befall on folks paying premiums. So we need more money. We just need more money. That's the bottom line, is we're going to have to increase the revenue to the state in the short term, midterm, and long term. And if we don't do that, then we're going to be facing just reduction in services from where we are, let alone not being able to make improvements that we would all like to see. And that keeps me awake at night. But again, we're just going to show up to work every day and do our best and come up with solutions. And I don't have a crystal ball to say what those things are, but I do know the work ethic is there, the values are there. It's just how do we pool all that together and come to an agreement in both chambers to come up with a budget to fund these things. And at least we're very early on in the process having these discussions about revenue. Early for the legislature. Now, some of you are like, oh, this has been going on for a long time. You're a little late to the table. But in the legislative timeline, this is early for us to be having conversations about that. It's usually, and as Rachel pointed out in her opening comments, we've got an election coming up, right? We've got these initiatives. We've got statewide electeds, new governor, new insurance commissioner, new attorney general. et cetera, that is going to really change the landscape. And that is not to mention the turnover that's going on in the legislature. So we have a lot of current chairs in the House that will not be there next year. We have leadership change in the Senate. So there's just going to be a lot of churn, and it isn't going to be until after the election, the second half of November and all of December, those 6 weeks preceding, 8 weeks preceding the session, when all this information is going to avalanche down on us, and we're going to have to decipher it and figure out a plan going forward in a very narrow window. And that, getting that problem statement defined, that will relieve some of the anxiety, because at least we know what we have to get to.
Anybody else want to add to that?
Add a little bit. Well, first of all, no bad ideas. So if you have good ideas on how to get, this is a big problem statement, and we tend to respond well when there are creative ideas presented to us. I also think it's really important for us to talk about the solutions, not always just the problem. And I remember being in a space with like a lot of high donors, developers in Seattle, Matt Griffin-ish kind of folks, and they brought in somebody who had a CV like this long, and she travels, around the world. And basically at the end of the day, she said, like, look, governments just cannot supplement their way out of this problem. This problem statement is too big. Until we actually have something like a guaranteed basic income that the federal government does, we're not going to get out of this. So I'm not saying that we're going to sit here and wait for that. What I'm saying is we're committed to this, and we're committed to it every day, all day long, to figure out what those ideas are, how do we glean from that, how do we look at best practices. We used the last few years with these one-time federal dollars to learn and listen to some great projects, and now not all of them are going to be ongoing. Like, that's the answer to this. But we can try to glean from those good ideas and do things better. I also want to pay recognition to the fact that we have to lean into all this, because as Democrats, we're always seen as being soft on public safety. But the truth is if you can't lock your door at night and protect your goods, right, that's also public safety. And so this is why we're committed to this work. And while we might have solutions at the end of the 105 days, thanks to agencies for bringing us solutions too, and bold statements, but if we don't get it all, I think I just want you all to know, I think we all do, is that we're committed. That's why we're public servants, and we hope that you'll stay committed too.
Thank you. Anyone else? Representative Peterson, Rep. Theringer? No, that's all right. Oh, Rep. Theringer, are you getting ready to speak?
I could speak, if there's some minutes I could, just maybe, and I don't know about on this question, and I don't disagree with Chair Ormsby and Mia. I think we're going to have to look at some revenue just to maintain what we want to do and hopefully do something new. I will say in the capital budget and housing space, I think there's some things we could do to be a little more effective. And it mainly relates to, we might be trying to spread the peanut butter a little too thin. And so projects sit there for a while without having the full capital stack, the full amount of investment. And that's part of, I think there's issues around regionalization and making sure everything's fair. But in the end, projects don't get built and the money sits there. So I guess I would ask the audience and folks that are working in this space, if you have ideas on how we might expedite the process so that we get the units built faster with the money we're allocating. What are the hurdles? What are the blocks? Are people showing up at closing, and are all those procedures going on a timely way? Are there staffing issues? Are there particular areas on the financing that we could do better on? I think there's some areas there where we can be a little more effective with the dollars we're investing. And if there's new areas like the CHIP program or the home ownership program or the mobile home, other areas where we should be making some investments, we'd like to hear about that also. So that's, those are sort of some things that would help us, address this challenge that we're facing on housing.
Yeah, thank you for that. So that's a good reminder that we've got some really, really smart people, including the four who are here with us today, working on this, and many other lawmakers working on this, but also all of you, all of us, everybody working in the field, coming to the table and helping to develop solutions is really critical. And so I think everybody here wants to hear from you what those solutions are and how we can solve this together. They don't have all the answers. I don't know. You all don't have all the answers. We can find the answers. So thank you for that reminder. So we actually do have a couple minutes. I think we can maybe take 2 questions depending on how long the questions are and how long the answers are. So let's see if we can do that. Does anybody want to start off with a question? Whoa. No, you can't ask it through the app. I already said that, gosh. Do you want to ask it out loud? Durahima, do you have a mic? Can I have this mic? You can share mics. This is Dua Rahima, who's a Housing Alliance statewide organizer. Thank you, Dua Rahima.
He was trying to hide.
Yeah, none of these are my questions, but I'm just saying where the app was.
You're going to read them from the
People on
app.
here, so I'm gonna read these because if
Oh
you're
my
following
gosh.
this stuff, boy, tough choices here. How does the Washington State Energy Code compare to the rest of the United States Energy Code? Recent code updates have made building affordable housing even less affordable due to those price increases.
Anybody get that?
Yeah, I know, I mean, and this kind of goes to Tim's earlier point around climate change. And then there's the cost of the initial building as you know, we're talking about operational costs in the long term. Often these, you know, better climate related improvements in building code realize operational costs that are lower in the long run. So there's always a balance, and we're trying to strike that balance when it comes to code revisions. And it's hard. I mean, it is a tricky thing to do, but we also know we can't just kind of write that off. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there from our friends in the building industry as to what the cost drivers really are. I think there are a lot of cost drivers involved in building housing. I think number one is, you know, land value is insanely expensive, especially on the western side of the state. So I think that is often used as a red herring, that, oh, it's just you people in Olympia keep adding green building codes. Just like many of the technologies in building, you take a look at solar and the decrease in that cost in a very short amount of time. That's also happening, I think, in other areas in the building code. So it might increase costs some, but I don't think it is as prohibitive as being said.
I also think it's important to remember that, you know, we're not a monolith. And so, you know, everybody's solutions around this situation isn't going to be the same. It's not like everybody's costs all the time are going to go up. And I think, you know, where we're at in general, and I hope you're there with us, is that sometimes the cheapest, like, you know, lowest bid isn't the best bid. Sometimes investing for a community to own itself, it might cost us a lot of money up front, but in the long run, it costs us a lot less overall because they can take care of themselves. So if we're building buildings that are healthier and cleaner, then our children and people, other people's children who are going to be our future workers are going to be healthier and helping to provide a strong business, you know, a strong employee landscape. So, you know, our job is to help make sure that the community is healthy and robust and ready to solve problems. So, you know, again, I think kind of to what Strom says, like, we can't be afraid of these solutions. Now, we can also work on subsidizing, and that's kind of where the Climate Commitment Act comes from, and other places, lots of different places that we're subsidizing, and that's the complicated truth.
Yeah, I think Strom referenced this, and Steve, if you have something to add, but I think we're looking at this life cycle cost analysis is basically what it is. And so I understand that it can be expensive up front for affordable housing, which needs to be affordable for 40 years. And so if not-for-profit developers are doing it, they have to front load, quality, et cetera, in terms of material and products that they're using. And it can increase the upfront development costs, but having it be able to be maintained for 40 years as affordable housing is super important, as opposed to for-profit developers that are going to unload the property after the tax advantages run out in 17 or 18 years, or however long it is. Then it has to be picked up by a not-for-profit to continue that 40-year cycle. And then there's all those improvements and deferred maintenance that are going to have to go into it because it was bought for the tax purposes, not for, and I'm not saying these folks are evil folks. I'm just saying their interest is in getting the tax advantage, not in affordable housing necessarily.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Question.
I would just add, we talked about operation and maintenance and services and the cost for that and the decrease in revenue from the document fee. So there's, right, initial upfront costs, but the long-term savings are undisputable. I know in the Aberdeen School District, for example, they brought a consultant in, redid their HVAC and are saving $20,000 a month in their costs for operations. So there are savings, there's cost up front, but I think there's savings in the long term.
Yeah, thank you. And one more question here?
Just really quickly, you've mentioned CHIP a few times. How much of a priority is it to renew CHIP?
It's a high priority. I started this, I think, 5 years ago on the supplemental, and it's been incredibly successful, I think. I think just the fact that the demand has been exceeding what we've been budgeting, and we've been increasing the budget every year since its inception. So I think it's super important. As I mentioned earlier, what it does is it provides the infrastructure to vacant land, which makes it, a lot of the housing dollars don't just build units, they don't build that infrastructure. That opens up a lot of space for new units. And I think we hope to be able to expand that in this budget cycle.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I think we're out of time for questions. Thank you, everybody, and sorry that we didn't get to those, and apologies for not getting to the questions in the app. It's just a little complicated for me. So we're going to wrap up with, I said you all had 2 minutes to wrap up. I think we just have 1 minute. And you can pick your question. What's the biggest opportunity that you see in the 2025 session to continue to make progress on addressing the affordable housing and homelessness crisis? Or what do you need from us, the affordable housing community, to pass good policy and secure meaningful investments? So you want to start, Representative Theringer?
Sure, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Any ideas you have on making our process and the trust fund or Commerce's work more efficient, get to my office and our staff, and I'd really appreciate that. And I guess I hope you, and it's not maybe news, but from the conversation this morning, that just how everything is connected to everything else. We talked about rent stabilization, how that's affecting mobile homes, and how we're trying to put money in the capital budget to help people maybe purchase their mobile homes, and it just how the budget, the document fee, just everything is connected to everything else, and that does make it a challenge for us as we try to tweak stuff. But again, any ideas you have to make make us work a little more efficiently and effectively to build more units, get more people into housing, from shelters to permanent supportive housing, really open to those ideas, because you guys are doing this every day, and we're setting the policies, but we need your input to make the policies work right. So thanks for the opportunity today.
Yeah, thank you for being here with us. Representative Gregerson?
Okay, well, government typically isn't that great at building community, but you are, and I think the more you can build community, connect those communities, not work in silos.
I don't think your mic's on.
Okay, I think I'm back.
There you go.
Government isn't generally very great at building community, but you are good at being trusted messengers in your community. And the more you can break down your own silos and bring forward, like as Steve said, is, the most diverse people coming to the table to talk about a complicated problem, to come out with multiple solutions, actually helps us do our job better. If you need us to convene those tables, great. If you can do that, even better. And I think that's the ask, is like to keep trying to figure out who new can you meet so we can figure out some of these bolder solutions.
I'll take an opportunity. I think this is an opportunity for the legislature and for the state to come together and Mia's words about in community to resolve to tackle these things together. I think creating that, defining the problem statement helps us know all the things that we're going to have to do in that space. You being keenly aware of that and having that flavor your conversations and discussions internally, and with some specific ideas for us would be super helpful because your touch points on this are wide and varied, and you coming up with something that is kind of collectively resolves a lot of the pressures you're facing, that would be very helpful information for us to know.
Thank you. Representative Peterson.
Yeah, and I think part of that partnership is also the other levels of government that you all have to operate under, primarily, cities and counties. The presentation yesterday by Steve, one of your Port Townsend developers, I don't know if they're in here today, but just a great example of how a city can actually be super effective in dealing with a crisis and then creating really good long-term housing policy by bringing people to the table. Sometimes you are going to have to be the person that brings a local government to the table to make sure that they're also held accountable. We'll do that, I think, on the legislative side, but really talking to your city council members, talking to the planners, talking to county council members to make sure that we're all kind of rowing in the same direction. When somebody, it's critical that all of this housing happens in every community in the state, and that's going to depend a lot on our local government partners.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you again all for being here. Really, really appreciate your work and your time with us today. Please join me in thanking them. And we are going to head to lunch now, where we're going to have a sort of a similar conversation about federal politics. See you there. Thank you. Thank you, Representative Theringer. We really appreciate you zooming in. Sorry we can't see you in person.
I very much enjoyed being Big Brother over the screen. It was,
Great. Have a good day.
Thanks.